Ba ba da ba da ba da ba da ba wow wow. Ba ba da ba da ba da ba da ba wow wow. That's my rendition of the song that I wrote for this podcast many months ago. Hello and welcome back to Wanderous. I am, of course, your host, Andrew Crusoe, and today we have a weird episode for you. And I'm not even on any substance except for maybe some caffeine. Usually I have historically been covering my around the world trip, and we've been talking about France for a while, if you've been listening for any amount of time. But today I would like to tell a story of I would call it a foundational story. Today we're going to go all the way back to 2009. Now you might be thinking, Andrew, I thought you were going to finish talking about your time in France and your time in Europe and how incredible Istanbul was and how it led you to Nepal and all the amazing things that followed. And I am going to tell you about those things, but I want to mix it up a bit. I'm going to give you I'll call it a holiday bonus because this should come out in December. And it's occurred to me this week that I have some pretty entertaining stories that I haven't ever recorded before. So today I've set aside some time and I'm going to tell you a story of one of the most ridiculous things that's ever happened to me while traveling. And I wanted to preserve it. People who know me well, they know that my memory, especially since the concussion, my memory is not what it used to be. And I don't want to drop any bits on this story. So I want to capture it today. And I think you're going to really enjoy this story. We're going to set our minds back all the way to 2009 when I was in the middle of kind of a crazy trip. The trip was kind of crazy back in 2009 because it was the first time that I traveled for more than 1 month away from my home. It was the first time I ever dipped my toe into being nomadic, essentially. I didn't really think of it in those terms at the time. I just wanted to see some amazing places in the United States that I'd never been to before. So I made my way to Denver. I got there by actually using Craigslist, and there are tons of stories from that trip, and I'm not going to tell those stories in order. I'm going to kind of intersperse things, but today I want to tell you about something ridiculous that happened to me in the first third of that trip. I ended up being gone for about 5 months. So long story short, I had been traveling for a couple months. I think this would have been right around July 1st, 2009. I was in my early 20s, and like a lot of people, especially young men in their early 20s, I really didn't totally appreciate my mortality. You just kind of unstoppable in some ways in your early 20s, or maybe I was just stupid. But I decided I had kind of been stuck in Denver, Colorado for a few weeks, and I didn't have that much trouble getting all the way to Colorado from Wisconsin. So I thought, well, I'm going to use Craigslist. I'm going to use Craigslist, and I'm going to get to Oregon. What's going to be the easiest place to get to in Oregon? Portland. Okay, cool. So I posted on Craigslist that I wanted to split gas money with somebody, and then I scoured Craigslist, and back then, especially back then, people would post, people would often put pictures, and I met, honestly, like great people, except for the driver in this particular situation, but everybody else was great. I ended up getting paid to help someone move from Denver to Chicago. At the end of that trip, heading back, I drove her because she was afraid of driving. Adult woman, great woman, but was really nervous about driving on the freeways. So before you think I'm crazy, my actual lived experience of this, probably because I'm a guy, but my experience with doing this has been pretty good. So again, long story short, I end up catching a ride in this white van, this Econoline van, which is a whole ridiculous story in and of itself. And we pick up another guy in Boulder, and it's just me and this guy. I'm going to call him JJ. And this old guy, I don't know, his name is like Ben or something. And the old guy's old, and he seems like a mountain man. And we're just driving through Colorado. We drive through Wyoming, and we make it to Boise. And in retrospect, this story is really foreshadowing just that things are about to get a little bumpy on this trip. It was pretty reasonable up to that point, except for the fuel pump situation, which is a different story. But I was kind of the designated tech guy, and whenever we would get in some area of civilization, I would find an open Wi-Fi access point, which was very common back then. You could get free internet and not ask anybody the password. People weren't very security minded back then, and there were tons of Wi-Fi networks that had no encryption at all. You could just join them and you could use the web. Great. And I was looking at like a Gas Buddy website to find the cheapest gas wherever we would go. So we get into Boise, it's sort of on the edge of town, and it's this, it's a car service area, very large area, and I go, hey, I see a McDonald's over there. I can get Wi-Fi. At the time, all the McDonald's had open Wi-Fi, but most of them. And they're like, great, we'll be right here, come back. So I jump out of the van and I sprint across the parking lot to this overhang. So I'm sheltered from the sun now, and it's basically an outdoor dining area for this particular McDonald's. And I open up, I pull out my iPod, which is all I had at the time. I didn't have an iPhone. I didn't even have a smartphone. I had a very silly cell phone at the time. And I'm looking around and I see, McDonald's, and I join the access point. And it had been a while since I'd had access, actually. We've been driving for a while that day. And I look and I open up couch surfing and I look at my email and I'm catching up on everything. And some people walk by me and I'm standing, well far back. I'm standing a decent distance away from even the door. And this concerned couple kind of scurry past me. And I'm checking things and I go, well, yeah, okay, that gas station right over there, that's going to be the best deal. Okay, cool. And I'm just about to leave, and a policeman walks up to me. And even though I have no reason I don't really have a logical reason to feel worried. I haven't done anything wrong, But the cop is like, hey, what are you up to here, young man, or whatever he said. And he looks at, I'm holding my iPod in my hand, and I'll never forget the craziness that I heard. So I said, is everything okay, officer? I'm just using Wi-Fi, and I feel nervous, even though I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not used to talking to cops, and I've also been taking a little while, so I should get back to the van as soon as possible. I don't want them to leave without me. So, which they probably wouldn't do, but I was starting to get nervous. Maybe they would get impatient. All my stuff was in the van. And the cop says the most bizarre thing to me. He says, this couple said they think you're taking pictures of people's credit cards. What? I don't know if I just said what out loud at that point. I probably was just dead silent, trying to compute the weirdest thing I'd heard all month, probably. And I look at my iPod and I turn it over. And this is, I don't know, this was like a second generation iPod Touch. So imagine an iPhone a bit smaller, didn't have a microphone, had the tiniest, most pathetic speaker that's ever been made, maybe, that would come out of the headphone port. That was how it was like a backup speaker. You weren't really supposed to use it for much. And on the other side, on the back, there is no camera. There is it's just a piece of metal. And I show the cop, like, they don't have a camera. He's like, "Can I see that, sir?" I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to be detained. So he looks at it and he's looking around, and he starts to play with my iPod, basically. And I start thinking, who could possibly think that it's so crazy. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard. Like, the fact that, and it must have been that couple, the fact that they would feel so anxious and their mind to race to the point of, like, there's so much, I didn't even know where to begin. Like, even if I had one of the best cameras in the world, do you know how difficult it is to take a photo of someone's credit card as they're moving from a distance and get all 16 digits of that card? I haven't tried it, but that would be very difficult. I've done enough photography to tell you that would be very difficult. And most of these cards now, they don't even have raised numbers anymore. The whole thing was such a weird thing to hear. And the cop sees I have a Photos app, and he's like, "Can I look in the Photos app?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you can look in the photo." I mean, all I'm going to have is, I had like random pictures. I didn't even have any pictures on there. I had like a few profile pictures, so I could add, if I made a new account somewhere, I could add an avatar picture that wasn't actually a picture of me. So it was like a couple pictures of me and screenshots. There weren't any, I think there were like very few actual photos. And of course, nothing from that day, because I would have to sync it from my Mac to get photos on there. Because again, there was no camera on the device. That device had no way of taking a photo at all. And this guy must have been like, maybe there's a secret pinhole camera. Maybe he's in KGB or something. It's like, no. So I'm watching him use my iPod Touch, and anxiety is rising in me. Rising. Because I feel like I'm running out of time. It's been like at least 10 minutes at this point. And I'm like, oh, God. It might even have been 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, my God. What if they move? What if they have to move? They weren't parked in a really great spot. I'm getting more and more anxious. And I'm like, I said, "Officer, I'm sorry. I gotta go. Like, I'm worried my friends are gonna leave. I'm carpooling with some friends." And he says something like, "Is there anything you need to tell me?" It was a weird response. And I was like, I'm sorry but like, I just was checking. I don't know if I think I said I was just checking Wi-Fi, or I might have said I was checking my email. And keep in mind that not everybody kind of understood Wi-Fi in 2009 either. And as I'm watching the cop, he was fine. He was fine. He wasn't rude to me. But I'm watching the cop flick through my photos, and I realized he's having fun. I became convinced in that moment that this was the first time he'd ever used like a good touchscreen device with like the built-in springiness of the interface and everything. And I'm like, "Do you need anything else, officer?" Which is the subtext for, "I need to go." I didn't say that out loud, but I was like, "Do you need anything else?" He's like, And he just kind of shrugs, and he seems almost disappointed that there's nothing here. And he says something like, just be more careful. And I am relieved to once again have the iPod in my hands, and I shake my head the entire way back to the van. Thank goodness I was able to spot them. I think they did move, if I recall correctly. They did. They moved a little bit, and they were like, "What was going on?" I'll tell you later. This Boise's weird, man. I think I said something like that. So, I had that story looped through my head for the rest of the day. I was like, how paranoid do you have to be to see a guy holding, this couple must have never seen like an iPod before, like an iPod like that. They've probably only seen the old white ones. But then to like who's walking around with like, I don't know, maybe they were holding their card in their hand. I don't recall that at all. But what a bizarre complaint. Isn't that a bizarre thing for someone to see me, who honestly, I probably looked like I was 16 years old because I age slower. I'm like a Numenorian. I'm like Aragorn. Being in my early 20s back then, I looked like a teenager, right? But even so, like, what has your week been like, or for that matter, your year been like? I gotta believe the cop must have been around. I can't believe they would call the police station but maybe they did, to have a cop walk over to the McDonald's and talk to a guy who's just standing reading a touchscreen, standing by a table and like looking. I think I was looking pretty nonchalant. I could be wrong, but pretty non-threatening, like wearing street clothes, maybe my hair was kind of messy. Maybe we would been on the road for a day, so I probably didn't look that great, but what a odd to ask a cop, what an odd thing. Anyway, if anything like that has ever happened to you, I would love to hear, weird cop stories in the comments, or you can just message me privately. I very not secretly really enjoy weird cop stories. Maybe not like violent stories, because that would probably make me sad. But different parts of the country. Yeah, and I will say, having been to over a dozen countries now, nothing like that has happened to me outside of the USA. I don't really have too many interactions. The only other cop interaction I had in the past couple years was in Japan, when I got ran off the road on a bicycle, which is a long story. That was pretty crazy. I will tell that in the fullness of time, because that is part of this big Europe story I'm in the middle of anyway. But I thought I would give you something a little different today, a very ridiculous situation. And at some point I'll also tell you, because I think, some of the people listening to this know me reasonably well. And there are a couple stories that I tend to tell in person that you may not have heard from me, that are pretty ridiculous in my opinion. But it's funny to reflect on that now. Another story that occurs to me. Well, there's what happened the next day. Maybe I'll tell that later this month. What happened the next day when, the intro to that is, the van started overheating, and luckily I had a liter of water on me. I had my big, I think it was a Nalgene bottle back then, before I moved on to Hydro Flask and dropped the plastic. The metal is better than plastic. And use that to kind of cool the radiator down. And we're having these overheating problems. I mean, we barely make it out of Idaho. And we were about 5 miles away from Portland when the shit really hit the fan, if you pardon my language. Really, I think a more entertaining cop story. And I'll tell that some other time about how I almost made it to Portland in the van, but had to find another way for the last 5 miles. And but it works out. Obviously, I'm alive and I'm okay. But thank you for listening to Wanderous. I really appreciate your hearts and your comments and your ratings on Spotify. You can always hear this show on Spotify. Since this is, I don't really have any photos of that day. Ha 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 ha. Because I had a Fujifilm, a large digital Fujifilm, like not DSLR, but like a large camera back then. And I didn't have that on me all the time because it was big. I didn't just waltz around with this big camera around my neck. So I'm not sure if I'll have a special bonus for you in that form on Wednesday, but I'll see if I can come up with something for the people who support this show. Although I have a lot of book stuff, new versions of book stuff that I might just do something like that. I've got a lot of fun new book things that are new versions of my tropical sci-fi. If you don't know, I write tropical science fiction as well as nonfiction about how Hawaii changed my life, which really in some ways led to this podcast and the travel that I do. If you haven't, please find Wanderous on Spotify. It's WANDEROUS. You can always find me everywhere @ Hello Crusoe. That's the word hello, CRUSOE. And thanks again for listening. This podcast is still very much a labor of love, and your comments and hearts just buoy me and encourage me to keep doing this. And I do enjoy doing this. If you have any questions, you're always welcome, regardless of your pledge level on Patreon. Of course, I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/HelloCrusoe. Regardless of your pledge level, even if you're just listening to this for free, I'm always interested in your questions and comments. Your constructive comments are very much welcome. And yeah, it's really an honor to be able to tell these stories to people, even people that I will never meet. And if you do want extra bonus stuff, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. When you do support the show, you also get over 28 hours of audiobook material. If you like audio material, and I guess you do because you're listening to this, that's a much better deal than buying my audiobooks on Audible or Apple Books. Is a much better deal to be able to stream all of that from your Patreon app, which is a free app. Stream all that anywhere you are. And I think you get all that. Yeah, I think you get all that starting at $5 a month, and you can cancel anytime. And every dollar goes into basically helping me survive when I'm on the road, which I will be again technically next month. So, mahalo nui loa. That's Hawaiian for thank you very much. And I will see you next time. Aloha.